flood and its aftermath. So we're going to skip over Genesis 5, which has its own interesting problems, genealogy, to get to Genesis 6. Why the flood, according to Genesis 6? It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And I'm going to destroy them along with the earth." And we saw some of the corruption coming in chapter 3. There was disobedience to Adam and Eve, so there was punishment. And it increased in Genesis 4, the Cain and Abel story that we talked about. I remember a Bible trivia game that we had when I was young. Somebody asked, who killed 25% of the world's population? So there's that one. But that's at the beginning of chapter 4. At the end of chapter 24, we have a fellow named Lamech who not only kills somebody, he brags about it. So the whole idea of sin coming in, sin increasing to murder, and then bragging about murder. We see in chapter 4, it talks about some increases in technology and civilization, but morality is going down while technology is going up. And so what we reach is kind of a peak here of corruption. Where again, we took God's good creation and twisted it, not just a little bit, but completely messed it up here.
So the word corrupt and corrupted there, is that twisted?
No, that's a different word. I said I'd bring my Hebrew Bible, but I keep forgetting to do it. That has more the idea of putrefaction. Bad
This
smell.
and here is putrefaction?
Yeah,
Okay.
good picture. God holding his nose at what had happened to his creation. So we spent some time looking at Genesis 1. How does Genesis 6 through 9 reverse this? Non-rhetorical question.
Going back to water.
Okay, we started with the water, we end up with water. Chaos to chaos. Things were ordered and filled in the beginning, and so they're disordered here. 131 said everything was good. Verse we just read said everything was bad. In the Genesis 1 story, we could draw a picture of it as, we might have talked about this in an earlier class, but the culmination of creation was humanity. And then we have the end of the story is the Sabbath. But now, humanity has become, what's the opposite of an apex? The nadir, the bottom of everything human beings were doing was corrupt. Now, instead of the peak, they've become the trough, and they're wiped out because of the wickedness here. But what I want to try and teach us to do, whenever we're reading, even the Old Testament with its law and its sin, to say, where is there grace in this? It's not a nice section. There's death, there's punishment, there's loss. Just the passage, just before the passage that we were reading about corruption, in verse 8, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. What word is being used there? In the eyes of Yahweh. That is the covenant name. Noah, humanity still is on a first name basis, if you like. Some other verses here, I think, that are quite powerful. Chapter 6, verse 6. The Lord God regretted that he had made human beings, and his heart was deeply troubled. There was sorrow there. God is involved emotionally in what's happening. He takes a personal interest. Again, in chapter 7, verse 1, the Lord again said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I found you righteous in this generation." I don't think that's an absolute term. He's not talking about sinless perfection here. I think he's saying everything is corrupt all over the place. So in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. You are better than the others, so I'm choosing you. And God blesses too in chapter 8, verse 22. But God is troubled. That's an interesting theological concept. It is theology. God risks in creating. Nicholas Walterstorff, who's a theologian, was taught at Yale, wrote a book called Lament for a Son. And he says, the tears of God are the meaning of history. God has a relationship with human beings. He loves, and whenever you love somebody, you're laying yourself open to be hurt. Unless you are an autocrat or are married, or you're married to a robot or something like that. If you open your heart, you're opening your heart to be broken. And so God loves. So he finds favor with Noah, and so he blesses him and looked after him. This is something God is weeping, if you like, when he punishes. Keep being reminded when I made my first trip to the dentist, I think I was 4 or 5, and he found a cavity. And it did not go well, because I was yelling to my mom, he's got this huge needle he wants to stick in me, and I was weeping and wailing, and she was weeping too, because she had to discipline me to calm me down so I could get my tooth fixed. This needed to be done. She didn't want to do it. And parents keep saying, it's for your own good. Well, it was. So I have a picture in my mind of God doing this. I don't want to discipline these people, but if they want to stay as people in relationship with me, there needs to be discipline. And also this story I find is interesting, the ambiguity of water. Water is the means of punishment. But water is also the means of salvation. The water is what floats Noah's boat, as well as what causes punishment to the people. One commentary says, the story of the flood is the story of God's sovereign judgment on a world that has lost its moorings. The story of Noah is at the same time the story of God's intimate, compassionate, and faithful love. One question that comes up in relationship to the flood is the extent of it. Is it global, the whole globe, or is it local? Now there is evidence for a global flood. The language in chapter 7, it seems to be looking at totality. Lifted the ark above the earth in verse 17. They rose greatly on the earth in 19, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered to a depth of more than 15 cubits. From the perspective of the author, anyway, all that he knew and was aware of was destroyed. He said the mountains were covered. We also have to remember, by the way, in looking at this, in the area of Ur the Chaldees, this map, I hadn't noticed it before, but this is a bit of a topographical map. So down the light part is low, and flat. And so in this area, they don't have any real mountains. You get some higher mountains up here. So if everything that the ones who experienced it knew was covered, it wouldn't necessarily take a lot of water down here. In 9:15, God promises, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. He's not saying there's not going to be any more floods, but no more universal destruction of everything. And some point out that there's geological evidence of floods from around the world. But from what I understand, again, not being a flood geologist, there's traces of floods, but they don't seem to be consistent. Not, as far as I'm aware, there's no one flood level that surrounds the whole globe. But there is some biblical evidence toward a global flood. But how about the local evidence? It says all people were killed. But according to Genesis 1-11, which is the story of the Tower of Babel, everybody is living in a very small geographical area. They're all living in this area. So all humanity that existed could have been killed even if it was a local flood. And somebody also argued that it would require 8 times as much water as currently exists on Earth if it was a global flood that covered the highest mountain, which would be Mount Everest. Where did the water go to? Where did it come from? Just a little bit, somebody did some figures on the amount of water. In chapter 7, verse 20, it says, well, there it used cubits, but translating it, since most of us don't have measuring sticks in cubits, about 20 feet above the highest mountains. So in a global flood, you need about 6 miles of water to cover Mount Everest. And the text says, the boat ran aground in the 7th month, the 17th day, and then in 8:5 the mountain tops were visible on month 10, day 1. So 2.5 months for 20 feet of water to dry up. And so 6 miles of water times 5,280 feet divided by 20 times 2.5 months would be 330 years if that was the rate of evaporation for it to take place.
This all presumes that the Earth was in the same condition then as it is now, which is not likely.
Yeah, so that's the response, a global response, that the Earth's surface was changed because of the catastrophic flood. It changed the natural laws. Now that could be a response, but the trouble is, as I think we talked briefly about the Garden of Eden, it mentions the 4 rivers. 2 of them we don't know, and that's one of the argument is because it must be so major a change that 2 of the rivers aren't known. We don't know where they are anymore. But it can't be that major because we still do know 2 of the rivers. If the whole surface of the earth was changed, what are we doing with still 2 of the rivers? I think one of the main parts of the argument deals with the word eretz, which is usually translated land. What do we mean by land? This word. It can be used in several different ways. You could save so much time if you take my Hebrew class. It could be, as I say, in a cosmic sense, God created the heavens and the earth. Like it could be the planet. That one word could be used for planet. And that would be a global flood. It covered the whole planet. It's also used in Genesis 1 for the land versus the sea. But then it's also used for the ground or the land or sovereign territory, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, which is not the whole globe, it's just this land. It's also used more rarely also for the underworld. So if it can mean any of these things, depending on the context, it says that the water covered the whole earth, global flood, or the whole land, the whole territory. So neither one can rely specifically on this particular word. Either one of those, I think, would be able to hold. What's the purpose for the flood? The reason for the flood we read in the passage earlier because of the corruption. What was the purpose? Was it to purify the world? That's what rabbinic interpretation is. That's why they use water to wash the world and it's clean. That's problematic. If you read the next episode, you've got the sin of Ham. If God brought the flood to purify the world, whoops, didn't work. We need plan B. Is it rehabilitation? There's still corruption before and after. We don't like this idea, but is it punishment for doing wrong? Is it repayment for sin? This is unpopular today. But if there is an absolute right or wrong, there needs to be some response to that. But when it's over, we have the covenant with Noah, which is what we have at the beginning of chapter 9. The word covenant is used in 6:18, but it's developed a bit more when it gets here to chapter 9, verse 1 through 7. And in this section, we've got the same charge given to humanity that was given back at creation. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. But unfortunately, there's something else that's added to this, not part of the command, but part of the result of the sin. It says, the fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and all the birds. So again, there's going to be a separation between humanity and the rest of creation. But notice the covenant that's brought out here. It's not just with humanity. Verse 9, I now establish my covenant with you, with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that come out of the ark with you. Every living creature on earth. It's more than just Noah. We're going to see this is different from some of the other covenants that are going to take place. But the covenant with Noah is a universal covenant. Next time when we get together, we'll be looking at the covenant with Abraham, which is just with part of creation. But the first covenant is the universal covenant, and so if you like, we're included in that one. Any questions for Tom? You can go ahead and get that. Observations.